Welcome to episode 5 of Manufacturing Intelligence. In this episode, Chris Cole, Associate Editorial Director at PharmTech, and Rick Jaenisch, Senior Director of Education, Outreach, and Digital Experience at Open Biopharma, kick off a two-part deep dive into the 6+ major moves in the world of AI and pharma in the last month or so. Specifically, Jaenisch answers the questions. At least 6 major AI and pharma moves happened in the last month. What's the biggest difference between them? Which one of these 6 is most likely to be quietly walked back or scaled down in 18 months? Are we looking at in-house ML training and dedicated data center build-out, or close to some subscription expansion with a workforce layer bolted on? Does it matter? If it is subscription expansion with a workforce layer, what would a genuine in-house build look like in contrast? Roche is going bigger on raw GPU infrastructure. Sanofi on a regional talent hub. Are these different bets on the bottleneck in pharma AI? For a pharma manufacturing leader making a business case, what do the performance data look like? A pharma CEO on a frontier AI labs board is new territory. Is this governance, oversight, or pharma keeping an eye on what's coming out of these labs?
So, as you're well aware, there's been, these 6, I'd say, major moves in the world of AI and pharma in the last month or so. I won't go through all of them, but they include, the BMS Anthropic deal, Merck and Google Cloud, Novo and OpenAI, Roche's GPU build out, Sanofi's Toronto hub, and a few others. But before we look at those, one by one, what would you say is the single biggest difference between these deals that people are missing when they kind of lump them all together as pharma, goes all in on AI?
I mean, these deals are wild, right? I mean, you have conceptually speaking, every between them, you're looking at like functionally a few billion in investment overall, right? But I think you're right in kind of saying what are the differences, because there are huge differences. You have some of them where they're focused more on the talent, and they're saying, well, this is going to require an entirely different talent pipeline, probably because they tried something and realized, oh, okay, well, that didn't work as planned. People aren't able to execute what we wanted them to do, and they rightly think that people don't have the skills to handle it, which is partly true. But you're also asking them to do an entirely different task. And so it's very difficult to say, oh, well, hey, you've been doing your job for this way for 10 years, and now we're going to suddenly say, we want you to do it a completely different way, and we haven't developed any training on that, but we're just going to try you to have you try to do it first. And then it has that kind of that flop failure, which I think we've seen a lot of just all over the place. It's not, I would say, one player has not consistently shown this, at least in life sciences, whereas, where we in the tech sector, I think we've seen it a lot just because there, you're talking about lower capital costs. So you see that impact right away. You don't have to worry about, expensive equipment and facilities when you're running Uber. It's just not nearly the same level of investment as a, biopharmaceutical CDMO. There are big differences here. And so how we're seeing those kind of implementation failures, I think, is also a bit hidden at the moment. I'm sure we'll hear more about it later in some Wall Street Journal post in 6 months or something like that. But in the meantime, we're gonna. I don't think that that's gonna be so burdensome in terms of the changeover, because I think there will be a lot of this emphasis on the training. You've seen a lot of it come also from those tech companies themselves, and so that is a huge component. So any of the entities that are doing sort of that workforce development pipeline and saying we want to enforce that, or we want to reinforce that and make that actually like viable for our folks so that they understand what kinds of changes we want to implement, is great. However, I don't know that they know what they want to implement. So they want to have this really robust training, but I don't think that they have an end goal in sight yet. I think they have a kind of an idea about what they want from the tool, but what you want from a tool and what a tool is capable of, you have to find a marriage in between. And it's nice that, we're seeing some gains. I think that every single conference I go to, I see people talk about how they're able to, speed up deviations and speed up not deviations themselves. That would be problematic. Speed up deviation report writing and, and also help a little bit with investigation. So there are lots of pieces to this that are kind of helping these things. And I think that the same with form filling. There are internal mechanics as well from any business that I think are finding some levels of improvement. But the question then also comes is that, is this new way more cost effective or not? And I think the ROI piece is now something that is now a lot more front and center than it was. I think that there was this emphasis on like, bah, it's okay, just do it, and the ROI will come out of itself anyway because it's science. It's just like you have that repetition of failure and you have something pull out of it. Okay, cool. We're going to put a bunch of money in reagents, but usually you gain something from that data later on, ostensibly by using AI, or some other method. However, the challenge with this is that, when the enterprise switch happened a few months, earlier this year, we saw, the big headlines about like Uber running its entire AI budget for the year in a few months because the enterprise switched and because they went from a flat fee model to a charge per token model, which is generally how an API works. So it wasn't unusual there. It was just that they had a lot of people inefficiently using it, which is why I think a lot of those companies that are focusing on the talent pipeline component means that how they use this will be much leaner, and so their ROI will actually be a lot better because they're not spending 50 prompts when they could do it with one. And so that type of kind of consolidation, that knowledge, that understanding that comes with that, I think is going to be huge. So the companies that are on that board are great. But the challenge I think about though is there's kind of multiple strategies being deployed, right? You have that one, then you have the like, well, we're just going to plug them into all of our data, maybe, or data that we want them to plug into, yeah. Because like, I mean, I imagine that it will be difficult still for a major pharmaceutical multinational company who wants to kind of open the floodgates to all of their data to one company who is not them. Historically, they don't do this unless it's like a merger or some other thing happening. So it is a bit odd, because the data is their business and they know that. And we've known that for a long time. I think the proprietary, you think about patents, you think about all these things, there are a lot of protections around what we're doing. And so, it's very important that, they want to keep that whole. So the idea that they're going to let them into everything, I don't think is as hopeful, because that would be the solution conceptually, right? If they want to leverage generative AI to its maximum, to its apex, then they would fundamentally need to let it into all the different silos. And the problem is that that's not going to happen. They're going to let it in chunk by chunk because they want to scale that risk. They don't want to take a whole bunch of risk. Like these companies have become large in part because they don't take massive risks. They take very calculated ones. And so I see this as yet another one of those very calculated risks where they say, well, we have to do this, but if we're going to do this, we're going to focus on a specific lens, because I think that they've tried the big wide, ones with like, I think about how everyone goes Copilot and Go, where they just go, here's Copilot, figure it out, just do some stuff. And they found that they didn't really gain the productivity gains they thought it would. Suddenly everybody has the ability to summarize emails, and now that just makes emails go faster. So like it isn't really the strict benefit that maybe it could have been. And so I think there's a bit of that pessimism that has kind of entered the chat, if you will. And so there's that. So I think that data aspect, I think those will be much slower than I think that most people believe. Most people are like, oh, they're going to go for it. I'm like, nah, maybe like 2-3 years, you'll start to see something come out of that. But just like the talent one, it's going to take time. Except the talent one will have probably returns faster, simply because if you are working with graduates and you are training them not only on your methodologies, but also on the AI methodologies you'd like to deploy, combine those together and you've suddenly made a better apprenticeship program. So not only have you improved fundamentally the pipeline, I know because it's something that we do at Open Biopharma, is that we, fundamentally work with institutions, academic institutions to like universities and community colleges to help the students who are there, come into play. And so like to see this, I was like, no, this is, to have industry knowledge, to have the industry capabilities, to know what industry expects of them, and to have that type of thing just built in with AI, I think that'll be beautiful if it's done right. I can't say because I don't know. I haven't seen the curriculums. I haven't seen the specifics on them yet, but I believe that they have the potential to do a lot of really good and much faster than per se the other data one. There's the third strategy as well. And that's where we see Roche and where we see Lilly kind of tuning in here. And I mean, tuning in because you got you got Lilly Tune Labs, right? So you have a different strategy than before. And I think that one is something that we're going to have to watch. And I don't really know what's going to come of it. I think it's going to be a really interesting gamble because it reminds me a lot of, Lilly's labs, they just opened up down here in San Diego, J Labs, that type of innovation hub, this incubator kind of, amplified with the power of these huge organizations and their massive networks and their massive capabilities. So that this way, those chosen, innovators can really do a lot, if they're selected. And so the thing is here is that these groups, it's more like their data. So instead of saying, I guess, trust OpenAI with your system, you then trust Lilly, I guess. And it's the same. It's the NVIDIA GPUs underneath. It's still the, same thing. They might have a broader coalition of alliances with other organizations that maybe help support that. And I think that might be there. It reminds me a little bit of like home labs. There's these kind of, we're in an interesting place right now where you're seeing lots of very, very different approaches to try to solve similar problems, I guess. I'm not entirely sure exactly what problem this solves, but I know that it does conceptually create a much smoother pipeline for them. So when I think about how JLabs and things work, that onboarding process, that tech transfer process can take a while to get somebody from a bench stage to an actual production stage, if it's even viable, if the clinical trials, if the pieces, if the scale up, there are so many components if that works. So I think here the idea is that if they have all the data on it, then that scale up becomes much smoother. And I think we'll start to see results at some point. I'm interested to see it because at the end of the day, we're a production incubator at Biopharma overall, and I do a whole bunch of, generative AI work. So for me, I'm like, oh, wow, this is a really interesting pipeline about how this will work. And I'm hoping that we see some really, novel kinds of therapeutics from it. Because conceptually speaking, this is where you could have a faster pipeline from conceptualization to production. This could actually lead to a faster pipeline. It could. I don't know. I can't say, but they're very different approaches. So I think those are the three big differences between all the approaches that we're seeing right now.
Got it. Thank you. So, with all of that in mind,
Yeah.
which is a lot, if you had to make a bet, if you were a betting person, which of these, big recent deals would you say is most likely to be quietly walked back or scaled down within the next year and a half or so? And which one do you actually think has the most potential to stick?
Well, in my experience, what's always worked, right? I think about growing up in the 90s and 2000s with all the Apple products we had in our schools. And it grew. We had like, oh, there's an Apple, that's neat. There's a little Apple II over there. Okay, cool. It's outmoded Apple, neat. And then there's more and more. And then obviously 2000 comes, we suddenly have portable iMacs and things like that. And it was the idea there was like you use what you train on. And I think that the organizations who are working in that space, who are working in that kind of workforce development space, will probably have not only the quickest functional return on these. The benefit there is that I think it has a lot of sticking power because it's a much cheaper investment, functionally speaking. Because if you think about like the GPUs and everything else, those are really expensive. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, tuition at a school is $25,000, and a whole bunch of that you can get written off, and a whole bunch of other pieces that can happen there. Whereas, yeah, you can write the cost of the GPU off and stuff like that. You still have to run it with electricity, other things. So like, there's still a cost to operating that tool that does eventually get passed on, of course. But the thing is, though, that the balance of these things, I think that the more sustainable approach is what they're doing with the talent pipeline. And I say this also because there's been a history of it. I think about how the different foundations between the regional areas of any of the organizations are. They almost always have an institutional organization with one of the local colleges because they know that that's going to lead to a steady pipeline of employees. Because when you have, 1,000 people, you got to keep them going. And so this makes sense. This is really kind of an adaptation of a typical one. So any entity that is involved in this. So I think about oh my gosh, like Sanofi, right, where they have the training lab, I think. There, I think is going to be a good one. You know, the one that I think is the biggest gamble that I don't know how they're going to walk it back. I don't know how you walk back the like something like Toon Labs. I don't know how you'd walk that back. Um, are, I mean, you could scale it down a little bit, but I just mean because it's such a big thing conceptually, it's such a change in perspective and approach in collaborations. Um, because it's again, it's a gamble. So, it could work out really well, or it may have to just they may ramp it up, and that may actually cause it to just kind of fail quickly. So it may just be one of those things they try well and just go, maybe this doesn't hang out. Maybe this doesn't sit around for a while. So I think that one's probably the one that's going to be kind of phased back a little bit. But I think I'd rather scale down but I think it's going to kind of go up to go down because I think they're going to have to because they're going to want to they're going to want something out of it, because like you put that much investment in something, you want something to come out of it. And then the last one, the data one, that one's tricky because like I again, it's the silos. So it really depends on which silo they do. So if they pick the wrong silo, yeah, they're going to scale that back real quick. What happens when what happens next. So if they choose to scale down their workforce faster than they scale up their AI capacity, they're going to have to rehire, which is what we've seen over and over again, where people preemptively go, well, to cover the cost of the potential of AI, we're going to reduce our workforce. Then this way we can cover that cost. And maybe, we make sure we show a profit so everything still looks good. But does that mean that, it's going to continue? Does that mean that we're going to see, that type of, I don't, it's going to be dependent on the silo. It's going to be dependent on, the difficulty, the complexity of the work. And so if it doesn't have those pieces, which it might not, because it really depends on the best approaches in the strategy have always been bottom up, and I can't tell if any of these are bottom up or top down. I haven't seen enough data yet from them to indicate to me that they are one way or the other. And if they're bottom up, I'm sure they're going to be doing a lot better. I'm sure of it. Just because when I've seen bottom up approaches, they work really well here because it's about solving the pain points. And since the people actually want to use it, they deploy it and they use it and everything works out swimmingly. But it's usually when it's the top down one, well, they're forced to use it. They already don't like it. And so they're reluctant to use it. So if they eventually use it, like the use case becomes sloppy. And so, I think that's what we're going to see. So again, if we end up finding out which one of them is top down, I'm probably dollars to donuts to be like, well, that one's going to be, walked back, because, they're just, they're not doing it the way they wanted to.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Um, so, each of these deals that we've been talking about,
Yeah.
it's kind of been pitched as these enterprise-wide things. So, R&D to commercial to manufacturing. When you strip away, all of this press release language and the hype, are we actually looking at in-house ML training and dedicated data center build out or closed system subscription expansion with the workforce layer kind of bolted on? And does that distinction change, how a reader should value these deals? I mean, you kind of just talked a little bit about that as far as top down, bottom up.
A little bit, but the thing is, the idea of having in-house ML training and a dedicated data center in-house means they're no longer rent seeking. Like at the end of the day, it makes a whole lot of sense. Every time I see, so that's why I was like Lily Toon Labs. Yeah, I can see that getting, just eaten in. At the end of the day, if they don't like what it's doing, they can just eat that, and then it becomes their own engine because it works for them too. Like that's the thing is like some of these investments will end up working out somewhat well internally, no matter what, just because you're not rent seeking. You're no longer, tapping on, oh man, because the problem with, that Uber had with that situation was, oh, well, I have all of this dedicated compute, all of this dedicated cost to one company, and I'm spending it all with one company, and it costs me 4 times more. Now my entire operation costs this much more. Again, with a capital lean organization, that's a huge hit. Here, okay, $1 million budget went to $2 million. Okay, that's really annoying. How do we fix that? It's not suddenly, this huge stock upending situation. So I think that means that, I don't think it's going to be as big of a problem, but I do think that we're going to see a lot more basically local data centers built inside these tools because it's a better look. Let's be real. Nobody wants a data center in their backyard, period. And if a company is willing to functionally basically expand their the existing server room that they had and turn their server room into a functional data center instead of a server room, I don't think anybody around them is going to really notice. Um, because the energy draw from an industrial plant is designed for that. So it won't have these huge, uh, sort of community level society impacts where people are concerned about one thing or another. So you won't have that kind of layer. So that I think that is good for life science companies as well, because hey, they eat that in there and it's good. It's good for them. It works for them. They'll find a use because at the end of the day, they've been storing all this data for all this time, and just it's just been a huge cost of money. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not, but they've been storing it and spending money on that storage. And this is conceptually a use case. So I mean, yeah, I think that's going to be there. But the closed system subscription expansion, I don't know. I don't think any subscription system is going to last too long. It's just, I mean, yeah, do they all have Oracle? Yeah. Do they all have, some CRM? Do they all have Microsoft or Google or whatever? Yeah, of course they do. So they have those systems, but they also have a level they're willing to support. And the problem with these systems is that they scale so wide with use that it's really hard to predict what your costs are going to be. And well, in a manufacturing industry, you don't want to have incredibly volatile costs. And so I think that that's going to be one difficult area. And the idea of a workforce layer bolted on, yeah, I think some people are thinking about this in the sense that like the idea of a workforce layer bolted on, I mean, kind of. So some of them are more genuine about their approach, right? And saying like, we've got training. Okay, cool. Well, I have talked with a lot of people about what their AI training is, and almost all of them have been like, so where can I get actual training? It is rare where I have talked with someone and they've been like, yeah, I was completely satisfied with the training that I got from my work on AI. And I was like, all right, cool. Did it tell you how to do something you wanted to do or something somebody told you that you have to do? And they're like, not really. And I was like, all right, cool. That's a struggle. So yeah, there's a little bit of that going on. And I think part of that's the top-down approach. Part of that's also like the fact that they're just kind of buying curriculum, you know, or worse, asking ChatGPT or some other tool or generative or Gemini or some generative AI tool for curriculum. Both of which are not necessarily the way to go. There are people who are well versed in what they're doing and can help with that. So I think that though I think that's it for sure. But the idea that they're all enterprise wide too, like I said, I don't buy that they are. I think that they want them to be. I think the idea is eventually they'll eventually be enterprise wide. Yeah, in 3 or 4 years, yeah, we're going to put them in all our systems. That's our plan. We want to do that. I'm totally with it. When we did an AI implementation with one company, we looked at them, we go, we're going to start here. We're going to see how it works here. We're going to start with marketing because it's the lowest lift. And then we're going to go from marketing and we're going to go talk with your quality folks because your quality folks are going to have the biggest challenge for us to kind of work with. But similarly, they're very, very language focused. So we go, okay, we can work with your quality. Okay, cool. Now with your quality, since quality touches everything, we're going to talk with you and say, where do you think is the most value? Then we go there and we go, okay, we're going to go over to facilities. Okay, so we're going over to facilities, seeing all these pieces of connection. Okay, well, facilities and marketing or facilities marketing and quality. Okay, I talk with you guys. Where are we going to implement next? Okay, now we're going to implement an R&D because now you guys have indicated that R&D needs to be making sure that SOP pipeline is walking through. So like the strategy for deployment, in terms of when you put the enterprise together, I think matters too. But I think it also matters depending on the actual, entity itself. It's going to differ every time. And so I can't say, how well they're going to succeed. But I hope they will. I genuinely hope it's successful, and I hope that patients benefit from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, so, if for some of these it really is a, subscription expansion with the workforce layer, what would a genuine in-house build actually look like in contrast? And also what would you tell a company that is doing the real thing versus renting it?
Okay, so the real thing in this case, um, you know, I guess is like local models, right? Where you're installing a local model, you have your own system, it's yours. You built this thing, you built it in-house with all your own tech. You grabbed a foundation model to start with, sure. Maybe you have a bunch of different foundation models. Maybe you built a really complex tool. Um, Even that's going to require people who are going to manage that. But the difference, though, is, I see and companies who are doing this, and this is where I think like the medium-sized companies are just going to absolutely go out there and just kill it. Is that if they do this right, like this is going to be one that's going to let them compete with the big guys on like pretty on like certain scales, not everywhere, because obviously you can't beat the, uh, what's it called? Economies of scale that a large company is going to have. But when it comes to certain approaches, yeah, you can find a better method or something else like that. And so how I see this is like if a medium-sized company has like a small dedicated um, cross-functional team. So you of that team, you have like a full stack developer who understands, the code, understands the pieces. You then have, your probably your quality expert, and you probably want to have your quality expert that also has a good amount of like AI knowledge that's kind of built in there, so they're familiar with the generative AI, what the limitations are, the systems. You then have like if you have like a person who has like facilities knowledge, but also has a knowledge of the process engineering, because a complex combination there is very helpful. And then understands the language. They don't need to understand the complexity of the AI themselves, but understands those pieces. Those are the three base, right? And you expand from there. Obviously, you take in more folks as you want to kind of change what you're doing. But with those three right there and a local model, you can fundamentally get a lot of what you kind of want out of a tool in play. You can have smoother SOPs, you can have a smoother quality system that's like instantly auditable, and in a way that like doesn't take you days. And the thing is, eventually the FDA is going to look at that. Eventually the FDA is going to get there. And if you're a medium-sized company and you're able to do this right now, that's amazing. Not only is it going to be really fast for you to perform, customer audits. So I imagine like CDMOs are probably going to be one of the first places to really like leverage this in a really useful way. And what's neat about this is that it also means that you could have another person from marketing in there too. And what that marketing person's doing is they're talking with those groups and they're building out all of your material that's facing, because like you need to have certain legal material, right? Everything has to go through certain review. If it's touching patients, if patients see it, any of those pieces. And so you could have a marketing person who's on that same team and who's able to help say, hey, I need this from the local model. So the difference is that these experts are actually saying what they need from the model, and then they're actually taking an instance of that model, spinning it out, and making it for that purpose. And it's basically making purpose-built tools. It's kind of a lot of what Pharma did 30 years ago when they had to make their own skids for everything. When everybody had to make their own skid for their new system. And it's not so dissimilar, except for now this is all kind of this amalgam of this firmware, hardware, software kind of situation. It's a little bit different, and our representation is differently. But I think that's the real thing that we're going to see a really big empowerment in the in-house build. I think the in-house build on the big side for enterprise scale, I think that's going to be interesting, because it's basically going to be its own. What I suspect will happen is they will acquire a firm, absorb the firm, and then have the firm use uh, uh, their model. Like, so I think a lot of the big guys have like option for early professionals where you got to work a year here, work a year here. So this way you get a lot of cross-functional training across a whole bunch of places, which is really cool for people who want to advance. But I imagine if they do something similar, but much faster, accelerated version of that for these folks, that could give them the cross-functional knowledge needed to understand, okay, how do we make these modifications? How do we do these things? Or they shadow other people for a year, and then they bridge them in, and then that firm becomes part of it. Because I mean, when you have an enterprise scale, you have thousands of people, sometimes 10,000 folks or something like that. It's just massive companies, massive amounts of people and resources and information to recognize. So you need to have that level of support. It's almost, that's why I say a company level. Small businesses, very different strategy. There, conceptually speaking, it's one guy. Or one person rather. It's just one person who owns everything, which is so difficult, because you think about what I just said about those four different people. There's still more people, that can come into that table, as we know. And so that one person has to try to shoulder that burden. And I mean, if you've worked at a small company, you know what I'm saying here, where, yeah, I kind of already do that. If you've ever been a sole proprietor, if you've ever been a small business owner where it's just you and maybe one other person, you're both wearing all the hats. So like this is no different. The difference though is that you probably have to bone up on a little bit of software coding to be able to be at parity. So that is something new, something weird. But the subscription expansion, the idea there, right? Some places will benefit from it right now because as long as the fees are flat, as long as they're working on flat fees, they're fine. But the second they get to accelerated costs, like they can't scale it so easily. There might be circumstances where they can, but just I have yet to see it. So that's kind of where I see those looking like.
Okay. Now, as far as the end result, be that better drugs or faster timelines, does it matter whether it's in-house infrastructure versus a closed system subscription, or is that distinction more about who actually captures the value than as opposed to what gets delivered?
I think it depends on a few things, right? Because the patent process is important to consider in this whole thing. It's always worth noting that, you know, a large portion of both the drug uh like even approach, whether you're going to approach building a drug or not, is whether it's patentable and whether you can gain that patent and whether you can find the specific wording that allows you to gain that patent. Um and so that's a piece. But the thing is, generative AI conceptually will help you find that route, which is, I think, part of some of the drug discovery elements. Um, so that could be interesting. The faster timelines, I think, can totally happen. We talked about digital twins before. If you have a fully executable framework, if you have a fully executable system, conceptually speaking, yeah, you totally can. And it really doesn't matter whether it's in-house or closed system in that sense, because in a closed system conceptually has the benefit of seeing multiple systems and trying to optimize for all of them conceptually. Because the question is that to the financial benefit of the entity running it or not? And if it is, then yes, they'll do it. And if it's not, then they won't. So, is that alignment there? If it is, sure, yeah. Then the closed system will do that. Otherwise, the in-house system is probably the way to go. And it'll probably produce things. The difference, though, is that it may take a long time for an in-house system on a smaller company to do something. For a larger company, totally. An in-house system would be able to produce the kind of data scale that you would need to be able to optimize. If you're running 20 plants and you have an in-house system, you can really see which one's running better or worse. You can do all kinds of A/B testing in different ways that you really wouldn't have been able to before in terms of seeing all of the analytics and data just compiling in real time, which is cool. Will that make faster drugs or better drugs? Maybe. Because it depends on which one wins. What's the winning strategies? We've seen, with single-use technology and continuous processing, maybe those will help produce faster timelines as well, and cleaner and probably better drugs conceptually. I know I like to have more even fill on my medications. I hate it when, there's a little bit less of my Prograf in my in my meds than others, as I'm a transplant recipient. And so, one of these kinds of things means that, okay, so in-house infrastructure works, I think, well for the bigger guys in this case, and the smaller guys, that one there, that's I think one of the benefits of a closed system for them is because you just don't have the scale to be able to know what's good in like 30 companies, what's good in like 30 different production lines. And if you're transitioning from one production line to another or one system to another, God forbid, that I mean the complexity of what you're doing with your own internal system may not be ready for it. You may have to talk with some other person who's done this and find that group and do that thing. And that whole consultant system, everything there may cost more than if you would just use a closed system that already had this internal data built into it. And by closed system here, subscription, I mean like there are a broad, selection of tools at this point, not simply like the big names that we see all the time. There are so many very, very, very targeted tools that could help with different functions. Maybe you're using like 40 different tools to stack that, and maybe that's a lot of subscriptions, but like you have to figure out what your costs are there. And I can't say what's going to be better in that case, but I can say what's going to be better for the larger entity and medium-sized entity just based on the availability of the data that's there. The other thing is that the one thing that we don't have on there is like the cost. Because if a drug is produced faster, and the patent process is leaner and smoother, conceptually, it should have a lower cost. Perhaps that results in that, perhaps it does not. I've also noticed that sometimes it, I think about how email happened, right? So if more and more companies have this ability and they're all producing these kind of like first to clinical, first right there, um, what's to say that we don't see like huge patent competitions to stifle or to humor one another. Just because I think about, because as a Hep C survivor, I think about the early days of Hep C and like how there was so much, there were so many patents that were kind of going, that were positioning to against one another because they knew what was there. You had a million people who needed a curative treatment, who were unable to use the previous treatments, who needed this curative treatment. And so everyone knew these people are here. We have a treatment. We have these amazing therapies. And there were a handful of companies that were very interested on the patent component, and the production component was probably a secondary a secondary position. And so because of that, you ended up seeing, okay, cool. Well, you have a bunch of companies producing amazing drugs, but you also see all this patent structure stuff, which, you know, makes the cost higher conceptually because you got to pay the lawyers, and IP lawyers famously are a little expensive. Rightfully so. I will say that much. um, but at the same point, that means that cost is added to the cost of the drug fundamentally. And so, we've always talked about R&D cost being a big one, but I'm like, patents though, that's a big one. So I am concerned in this case that, yeah, there may be better drugs, maybe faster timelines, but it's entirely possible that the cost ends up being more than we expected, because it also means that this is fundamentally a faster patent process than it is a faster production process. And so that is my one, question of will we see this? And we'll see it within the next year or so and see which is faster. And it's just such a weird question in that way, because it's just like, yes, better drugs, yes, faster timelines, but there are all these hidden
Yeah,
components.
sure. So I want to start kind of going into some of these, recent deals, one by one.
Yeah.
So Roche is going bigger on raw GPU infrastructure.
Mhm.
Sanofi's going bigger on a regional talent hub. Are these two different bets on where the bottleneck in pharma action, excuse me, in where pharma AI actually is, for compute versus people,
Mhm.
or are they kind of the same bet, where just wearing different clothes or different hats?
Totally different, completely different approaches. Um, the GPU infrastructure one is there, but both of them are actually really safe bets. Um, these are really safe. Because the thing is, their GPU infrastructure, okay, cool. So they don't use it for this function. Well, they're going to use it for another. Like, it's going to have, no matter what, it's going to get use. The question is will it get the ROI? Yeah, eventually. It just may not hit as soon as they like. Um, Whereas the talent one, as I mentioned before, like, nah, that one's going to be better because it's actually going to kind of open up a bottleneck. Because one of the big problems, right, is that people don't like AI, man. Like, I talk about AI all the time, and like, honestly, uh, people do not like it. It's unfortunate because it's a super useful tool. I'll be like, they're always like, yeah, it's gonna cure cancer and do all this stuff, but like also it's like bad for people. And I was like, okay, do you want to like tell me how? And they're like, no. And I'm like, all right, good talk. And usually it stems with like data centers or like perceived use or people being what's called like AI pilled or AI psychosis, where they're kind of going, they're believing too much. AI pilled is more like automation bias. It's functionally you just believe what the machine turns out every time, and you just kind of follow it, and you're like, yeah, that's fine, sounds good. It's Previously we called this algorithmic bias. It's basically people who fell down the YouTube rabbit hole. Is also another terminology for it. And so, these things, have created a very an atmosphere around how people feel about AI. So if you actually don't teach people that this is different, then they will go in with the preconceived notion that it is not. And if you do not teach people that this is a different application of the tool, you know, not everything nuclear is a bomb. And so, there are many things that is useful for and practical for. We would not have submarines that can go as far deep as they can without nuclear power. it is a fantastic source of energy when used for that purpose. And so there are many things that can be done with this tool. The question is, will they be able to, properly align their training with their objectives? And I think that will take time. I think the first cohort or two will probably be a little sloppy, just like any cohort is. And then by cohort three or four, it'll be nice. It'll be in tune. That, and I think so. I think it will be a relatively quick turnaround because a cohort here is, depending upon your system, 3 to 4 months, possibly 6 months. So that means that within about 2 years, you're going to see a nice kind of, a nice flow of talent who is ready to actualize these things. And once those things happen, it will be quick in the institution itself. As for the GPU infrastructure, right? There, they build out this great internal system. Cool. What they're probably doing right now, and what I've seen a lot of them do, is sell it as a service because they want to make that money back. They just put a bunch of money into this thing, and I get it. They know it works for them. They have developed a process that works for them, and they go, hey, we can just sell this right now to pay for this. And so I can't say that's exactly what they're doing, but it sure feels like it. And it makes a lot of sense. When these things are expensive investments that you have to pay for, yeah, having a steady return, it's nice to have a mortgage when you have renters who will pay it for you. So both of these aren't really huge gambles. They're very different strategies that will have very different results as well. Because, I think about how Roche is doing with the GPU infrastructure. If people aren't buying the service, then they know that either they're doing it internally, or two, they don't trust that it has the benefits that it seems to benefit for the cost. And so they'll have to adjust the costs and figure that out and figure out what they can draw for it. And once that happens, then they'll have to go, okay, how are we using it internally and how do we leverage it more internally so that we can eat this cost better? Because that's what'll happen. At the end of the day, it's still a really good tool. It's still really useful. It'll just get repurposed. So if they don't see the sales that they want to, it'll just get turned in-house. I mean, Roche is huge. At the end of the day, if they have new entities that have come online or new acquisitions that have come into play, those new acquisitions can just be new customers for this pipeline. And then they can improve their systems using this new GPU infrastructure in some way. And then boom, it works. So very different approach. And I think about the talent aligned with this. What that means is that Roche is going to be hiring more data engineers, than they had in the past. Whereas Sanofi is going to be hiring more of the people that they were hiring, only now with AI expertise. And so when you think about the composition of the company, you have to think about how that's going to change dynamics as well. And what does that mean for long-term things? I think I like what Sanofi's doing, just because I appreciate the idea of betting on people. I think that we're worth it at the end of the day.
So yeah, as we talked a little bit about earlier, a sitting pharma CEO on a frontier AI labs board is pretty new territory,
Yeah.
uncharted territory even. Is this governance? Is it oversight? Is it just pharma trying to make sure they're not the last ones to know what's coming next out of these labs?
I mean, it's a smart move. Like, without knowing anything that's happening, it's good PR. At the end of the day, it basically says, hey, we are very interested, not only so in where this is going, but we also want to, make sure that it is serving the same kinds of goals we want, which is good. I think objectively speaking, that shows industry alignment in a way that is, probably positive. Um, just because, I think about, to me specifically, I think about one of the leaders in functionally in the life sciences among frontier AI, and of course it's Anthropic. Claude is the tool that everyone looks at and goes, man, this is so good at this. Even to my annoyance, even my lab keeps using Claude, even though I keep telling them stop, keep using Gemini because it's our tool. Um, and you know, it's a useful tool, and so I have to now give them a Claude account. But at the same point, though, it makes a lot of sense also because Claude has been so heavily used by a lot of the federal government, and so if you're always interested in what a tool that is potentially going to be used by like an organization like the FDA, you want to make sure that your models, the systems you're working in, are working in alignment. Because as we know, and we've seen evidence of this, where in hiring, where what AI tool you used to produce the resume and what AI tool they used to scan the resume matter. If the models are the same, they're more likely to actually pick with preference. And so I think that has to be in their mind. So I'm sure that that's a component of it. So I think it's more than optics. I think this is also serving the reality of going like, no, I can better understand what they're trying to articulate, what we're trying to work together. And like, honestly, it'd be great if both of them just published, transparency on their tools, but no, they're not going to do that. Like the FDA is not going to do that. The companies aren't going to do that. No one's going to be doing that on their piece. So this is as close as we get into that, where they actually can kind of look at the things and go, okay, are we moving in the same direction? Good. So I think that there's actually there. I don't think there's going to be a huge influence on how the model gets built, though. I don't think that that's necessarily going to be as much of a happening thing, because I think that you're just going to have, because it has segments, right? It has a life science segment. So I think it will help make that more useful to life sciences. Um, that's about it though. I can't think that because C-suite doesn't have a lot of like specific expertise to add, they don't have a C-suite officer isn't going to know the specifics needs of a specific function on a specific thing. They don't turn wrenches, so like they're not gonna know how they need to turn that wrench. And so that's going to be hard to translate that to the robot that's going to want to turn that wrench. So that's why I'm like, well, yeah, it'll be useful in a larger sense, but unless there are cross training aligned projects, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's see. Do you expect to see more of this, as far as pharma execs embedding directly into AI labs, or it's kind of see this as a one-off given the Novartis and Anthropic's existing relationship?
I think that we're going to see more of this kind of generally. Also because it so long as it raises investment, it's going to happen. So, the idea of it being optics or something of that nature, yeah, totally, sure. That's definitely a piece. Like, why would you not do something if it's not PR? If you're telling people about it, well, then it's PR. So yes, but you know, all these companies have shown a lot of intermixing, right? Anthropic uses a bunch of data centers that are owned by XAI. Like Microsoft famously uses not all the models. Like every single one of these tools uses all of their different systems. So fundamentally, I think that you're just going to see more of this intermixing, and I think that you're going to see it probably on a layered scale, because I think that the idea of the pharma execs embedding into the labs, I think that part is kind of more for show, because again, it's just a matter of what types of knowledge that they can provide, and the types of knowledge they can provide are generally already available, just because they say them all the time. An exec's role is to announce and to explain and to understand and to know that wider viewpoint, and so those are things that can be known. They also have obviously their subset of more private knowledge. But in this situation, what I see really seeing that powerhouse there is more of when those execs assign people and they go, hey, I've got these four people who are like really good at these things, and I want them working in this lab in this way. And I think those types of aligned projects that come from like pharma execs, when you see those, I think those are going to give you a really interesting expectation from something, because those are going to be some real projects with use cases, and I can't wait to see what happens in them, because like that's the type of cross pollination I want to see out of the AI labs. I love it when executives shake hands, but I like it more when subject matter experts are having a discussion.